All right, thank you everybody. Talo falava, nisan bulavinaka, yakwe, hello geta. Welcome everybody to this press conference. Today we're very privileged to be joined by honorable ministers, special envoys, and the assistant minister from various Pacific countries. My name is Vui Gemma Nelson. I am a proud daughter of Samoa and the advisor to the permanent mission of Tuvalu. Our press conference today will focus on hearing from some of the voices who are most affected by climate change. In the past year, fossil fuels have been dragged to center stage in international negotiations. At COP28 in Dubai, governments acknowledged the need to transition away from fossil fuels, but actions speak louder than words. In 2024 alone, we are at risk of unleashing an additional 12 billion tons of greenhouse gas emissions. Today, Australia has announced 3 new coal projects, which are set to unleash 1.3 billion tons of emissions. Are we transitioning or are we keeping status quo? Momentum, however, is building behind the call for a new global treaty with 3 clear pillars. 1, non-proliferation, ending the expansion of oil and gas projects. 2, a fair phase-out, equitably phasing out existing fossil fuel production, in line with the 1.5 degrees target. And 3, a global just transition to create a framework that supports and finances the transition to renewable energy. In the Pacific alone, 64% of our people still lack access to power on a regular basis. So without reducing reliance on fossil fuels and ensuring just access to renewables, we are at risk of leaving Pacific peoples behind. To do this, we need global commitment and we need voices like our esteemed panelists to drive this ambition. Without further formalities, let me introduce our panels. I will give brief summaries of their biographies, since to do full justice, it would take all of my lifetimes and probably yours. First, we have the Honourable Minister Maina Vakafua Talia, Minister for Home Affairs, Climate Change and Environment of Tuvalu. Minister was born and raised in Vaitupu, Tuvalu. Because of his strong link to community and his people, he continues to be the voice of his community and his beloved country on the issue of climate justice and Indigenous issues. He completed his PhD at Charles Sturt University on the issue of climate justice and was elected as a Member of Parliament for Vaitupu in 2024. Next, we have the Honourable Minister Trevor Manimahanga, Minister of Climate Change, Disaster Management and Meteorology for Solomon Islands. He was elected as a Member of Parliament in 2023, and prior to this appointment, he had a long career in public service advising on economic and public finance policy. The Honourable Manimahanga completed his Masters in Commerce in 2010 from the University of the South Pacific. Next, we have the Honourable Lenora Gerigera-Tambua, Assistant Minister for Foreign Affairs in Fiji, and also the Deputy Speaker of the House. The Honourable Gerigera-Tambua was elected to Fiji Parliament in 2018, having campaigned largely on environmental, youth and women's representation in Pacific parliaments. She has continuously worked alongside local and international charities and aid organizations in raising awareness on environmental justice, suicide prevention, and women's representation. Next, we have Her Excellency Tina Stegi, Climate Envoy for the Republic of Marshall Islands. She's been Climate Envoy for Marshall Islands since 2019, acting as a spokesperson, lead negotiator at the UNFCCC, and occasional convener of the High Ambition Coalition. Born in Saipan, raised on Kwalajen and Majuro, and educated in Honolulu, she brings a Pacific focus to her community-based work on a range of issues, from the impacts of nuclear testing to sustainable development and climate adaptation. Ladies and gentlemen, I will give the floor to the panelists to canvas or provide context for our conversation today. Let me first go to Tuvalu. Minister Talia, based on your long experience in the UNFCCC COP process and your work as a climate activist from Tuvalu, can you tell us today, are we doing enough or do we need to do more?
Well, basically, let me first of all acknowledge the organizers for putting this event together, which I believe is one of the most important events that been attending in the past few days, apart from the many scheduled events. Thank you, Gemma, for those kind introduction. But when it comes to climate change or the issue of climate justice, and coming from a small, low-lying atoll country, it is very difficult for us to pick up the pace of the work that other countries are doing, especially in trying to address the issue of climate change related sea level rise. But with the Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty, which Tuvalu and other Pacific countries are leading at the moment, for us, specifically on the issue of FFNPT, it is very important to, we cannot talk about climate change or climate justice without addressing the root cause of climate change, which is the fossil fuel industry. And I think I do not need to repeat the significance of the treaty and why Tuvalu think the treaty is important for the survival of our people. Noting very well the science is very clear when it comes to the 1.5 degrees Celsius. For us in Tuvalu, it's just numbers. Whether we talk about the 1.5 or exceed the 1.5, but the devastating of climate-related events that we are facing in Tuvalu is more than 1.5 degrees Celsius. So it's very clear that if we don't address the issue of fossil fuel in the world, there is no way out of this. So we really need to address the issue of fossil fuel. The opening or the expansion of fossil fuel, I would say it's immoral and it's evil. And it's unacceptable for us living in small, low-lying atolls. So it is important that we put this into context, that whatever we discuss in the international platforms, we should also relate it to what we are going through in small, low-lying atolls. Because if we cannot address the issues that we are facing back home to the international community, I think there is no point of joining or singing the same song over and over again. In the past few events that I attended, I think we are fatigued of telling our story over and over again. But we are attending this type of forums or these platforms because we cannot fight climate change alone. We need the support from other countries. And we should look into the issue of climate justice from a moral standpoint. Because if that moral standpoint and the spirituality that lies behind it is missing, I think we are missing the whole point. I can engage more in the further discussions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Minister, for those powerful words. Indeed, more than 80% of greenhouse gas emissions are being produced by the fossil fuel industry. It is immoral that we continuously fail to address this issue. On that note, frontline communities, such as those in the Pacific, are most impacted. Honorable Gerengera Tambua of Fiji, please, would you tell us, as a member of a frontline community, what is important for your country when we talk about the just and equitable transition to renewable energy?
Warm greetings from the islands of Fiji. Fiji reaffirmed its commitment to the Port Vila call for a just transition in March of last year. And the Pacific SIDS leaders committed to the transition away from coal, oil, and gas in our energy systems, in line with the IPCC pathways for limiting global average temperatures to under 1.5. Yet at COP, we witnessed the most advanced nations using their tactics to avoid the reference or mention of the words oil, gas, or fossil fuels, let alone creating a global plan to equitably phase out coal, gas, and oil production. The science is pretty clear, as you all know, that fossil fuels are the primary driver of intersecting health, biodiversity, and the climate crisis, with 86% of carbon dioxide emissions and 99% of plastics derived from fossil fuels. And against this backdrop, I just want to reflect on the importance of a just transition for our Pacific communities. As of 2022, 1/5 of Fiji's rural and maritime population still lack access to regular energy supply. Now, while this number may appear insignificant in some of the eyes of the globe, when you take it in the context of the whole Pacific SIDS, it's 64% of our entire population across Pacific SIDS that lack access to regular energy supply. We don't just need transition, we need access. And this is why a just transition is imperative for us. This has been supported by our Pacific Island leaders in the 2023 communique at the Pacific Island Leaders Meeting. And our region is one of the most at risk and on the front lines of a changing climate. So any energy transition must be resilient to disaster risk. The cost of power is another thing. The cost of power for many communities is hugely prohibitive, as well as with varying energy costs in the Pacific. Fiji's market is one of the cheaper markets, costing around 0.16 US cents per kilowatt of energy, in comparison to Tonga, where their per kilowatt cost is just under USD $1. This creates significant barriers to access and usage. And to date, 80% of fuels imported into the region are used for transport, both maritime and land, and 70% of electricity is actually generated from petroleum fuels in the region. So Fiji, like many Pacific SIDS, have adopted aggressive renewable energy targets under our nationally determined contributions. And we agreed to a 100% renewable energy target by 2030. Now that's only 5 years away, and carbon neutrality by 2050. But how can we ever achieve these targets if we continue being faced with the challenges and the ever-growing push for expansion of the fossil fuel industry? And the Minister for Tuvalu captured it very, very, very succinctly when he said that this is part of our culture, our land. We have communities that are in danger of losing their state under the ocean. And it's none of our fault. It's none of our doing. So again, this is one of our greatest challenge. In fact, it is our greatest challenge, but we must get right to achieve the greatest challenge in people's lives and human history. And I thank you for inviting me on this panel. Naka.
You've touched on the science. You've mentioned some of the facts and figures. I think all of this information is not new to us. We know the science tells us what we must do, but we need to agree on how we must do it. I turn now to the Honourable Minister Manimahanga from Solomon Islands. Financing, technology transfer, capacity building, and other means of implementation are essential for vulnerable countries such as SIDS. We know the money exists, and last year alone, 2.6 trillion USD was spent on subsidies that continue to cause harm to the environment. Honourable Minister, what can you tell us about Solomon Islands' experience accessing the support they need for adaptation, mitigation, and renewable energy transition?
Thank you. Excellencies, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. Hello, Keta, and warm Pacifica welcome. It is an honor for me to address you all this afternoon and to share my reflection on the question that is being posed. For Solomon Islands being an least developing country, climate change poses the greatest threat to our population and also to our sustainable development goals. Being at the front line of climate change, Solomon Islands and the Pacific as a whole remain frustrated that the climate finance that is being promised to help us address climate change remains very difficult to access. For small island nations like Solomon Islands and other Pacific Islands, climate finance is key means of implementation to solve the climate crisis and to achieve our development goals. we are committed to transitioning to renewable energy. However, this is also conditional on international support in the form of financing, technical assistance, technological transfer, and capacity building. In this instance, climate finance is key. For Solomon Islands, one of our biggest initiatives to shift to renewable energy or to enable more affordable electricity and improve accessibility is the Tina Hydro project. It is a partnership between our government and 6 different financiers, combination of grants and loans, which totals up to 210 million USD. The components covering the hydropower facility, transmission lines, access road, and technical assistance. Whilst we have been able to mobilize financing at scale for significant and huge renewable energy projects, the modalities and conditions around the financing have also presented us with a lot of challenge. First challenge is the fact that harmonization remains a challenge with different requirements and standards of different donors. Therefore, project kickoffs and financing drawdown has been very slow. Second, the absorptive capacity to implement remains an issue, and there were issues with meeting technical capacities that are required. And third, whilst remaining committed to transitioning to renewable energy, we incur a lot of debt to repay the loans associated with the project. The adequate provision of climate finance from developed to developing countries is a great enabler for developing countries' ambition. Accessing financing should be at scale, but must be simple and fit for context and purpose. Harmonization and simplification is necessary to enable effectiveness and efficiency. In saying this, I want to share and reiterate some of the points that's being raised globally. Reforms to the international financial architecture are needed. Multilateral development banks and international financial institutions must evolve their operating and financial modalities to specifically target climate change adaptation and mitigation. It remains important to ensure scale-up funding that is easy and simple to access, including the deployment of instruments that would be relevant and fit for context for our small island developing countries. Instruments such as grants, guarantees, and non-debt instruments taking into account the debt burdens. This would be a helpful first step and progress towards enabling climate finance to be better fit for purpose, support global finance goals, and therefore transformative in terms of enabling resilience for the most vulnerable. Whilst we continue to push for increased development and climate financing to enable us to address climate change, the need to reduce emissions and keep global temperatures below 1.5 degrees remains. We call on all major emitters to drastically and deeply reduce emissions to keep global temperatures below 1.5 degrees. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Minister, for that powerful ending. Indeed, we continue to treat the symptoms and never the illness. On that note, I turn now to Marshall Islands. Your Excellency, Mr. Stegi, despite the victory of COP28 mentioning fossil fuels in the decision text, we know that major producers have been slow to make real change. The Republic of Marshall Islands, like many other Pacific countries, have taken leadership roles to push for the change that they want to see. Can you tell us what essential actions and commitments does RMI want to see from the international community in the coming years? What action do we need now?
Thank you, Gemma and Yagwe, and Komoltada, Vinaka. Thank you to all the ministers and colleagues who are here with me to discuss this very important push by the Pacific and by all members of this initiative to really advance this cause. And I, as someone who spends a lot of time in the UNFCCC, I don't want to belabor you with all the technicalities of the negotiations, but just to remind you of where we were at the end of last year coming out of Dubai. And I think we've heard from others that decision to finally, after, what was it, 30 years, address the source of the problem that we're facing, fossil fuels, by getting the text to transition away from fossil fuels into the agreement. And let's not forget where that text came from originally. It was at the Pacific Island Forum Leaders Meeting preceding COP28. So the Pacific has been the champion for this, not just for decades, but now. The Pacific is coming to the table with the solutions. That agreement, as we said, it was historic, but it was inadequate as well, right? We need to go much further, much faster. And we did also push in Dubai to have an agreement that would follow up with process and plans and enablers like finance. And let's be frank, we did not get that in Dubai. And that's why this year it needs to be our focus. I'm glad to see that with the work of many of my colleagues from the Pacific, our Pact for the Future affirms what was agreed in Dubai, that the future will be fossil free. We even had the COP28 president say it's inevitable that the future will be fossil free. The question is whether that future will come fast enough and in a just and equitable manner to actually safeguard the lives and livelihoods of our peoples in the Pacific. So we've been the champion, but will all that work benefit us? This is why we're here today having this press conference, so that the world doesn't forget not just the role we've played, but the needs that we have to make sure that we are actually able to benefit and secure the future in this fossil-free world that we're all working toward. So what do we need to see? We really need to see an acceleration of the transition away, and we've heard from Gemma that we're not seeing that. Even though we made that historic agreement and the words are on the paper, it's not showing up in action and in delivery. And we really need to hold all the countries who have signed up to that agreement to account. We can't be quiet. We need to continue to hold our partners and others to account for the words that they put down on the paper. And that includes not just the transition away, but the tripling of renewable energy and doubling of energy efficiency, which were specific goals also in that COP28 agreement. So what is the key enabler to make this transition equitable? It's finance. So I think I would just, if anything, if you take away finance, delivery, and delivery to the most vulnerable, who need it the most. That means that developed countries need to drastically increase public finance. There's no question. It also means we need to see a movement away from fossil fuel subsidies, which we've said over and over again that we will phase them out, and yet we still see subsidies in the, I think it's in the billions. Gemma can, trillions, sorry. I think it was 7 trillion, is that the number? We're still seeing that. So how can we possibly transition away if we're continuing to pay for the very cause of this problem? And also, imagine if that money was actually repurposed to, and I'm sorry for the word, but to fuel development and deployment of renewables and the energy efficiency, which we also committed to triple and to double. So these are some of the structural issues that need to be addressed. And we also need to, again, hold partners to account that there is no new development or investing or permitting in fossil fuel development. There has to be, we need to see time-bound plans for the transition. And we need to see these incorporated into the updated national determined contributions that everyone has said they will put forward next year. So I think finally, I just want to talk about tracking of the delivery. I mean, if we're not seeing it happen, it's because we can't account for it. So there needs to be a tracking of that delivery on the transition away, because without accountability, we don't. The commitments alone does not make multilateralism work. It's only going to work when we have trust in the process that what we say translates to action. And the only way to know is if there is accountability is if we can track and we're transparent. And when I say we, collectively. So I think those are just the few points that I would like to make. We need to accelerate the transition, and we need for it to be equitable. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Stege. You mentioned the 7 trillion in subsidies that are funding activities that are destructive and have many, many negative impacts. And that is also an underestimate because there's a lack of transparency. I think this just highlights what you were saying about the need for more accountability, more transparency mechanisms. That is the end of this introduction segment and the framing of this discussion. I would like now to invite our journalists in the room, as well as those watching online, to pose some questions to the panel at this time. Yes, we have
Yeah,
Ayush.
I'm Ayush from the Indian Press. We know that for Pacific Islands, climate change is not just an environmental issue, it's also a security issue because the territory is disappearing. It's a sovereignty issue. In this context, can you tell us from the last COP which happened, how much climate finance has been made available to the Pacific countries in particular? And the second question is that it has been India's experience, or my experience covering the UNFCCC process in detail, that oftentimes local solutions are needed and that a one-size-fits-all approach does not work, particularly as communities and geographies differ across the world. So what are the conditionalities that the minister here hinted at towards that are attached to this climate finance that does come through? And can you just give us some detail on that?
I think we might take a few questions just to generate enough discussion. The floor is still open. Yes, sir, please.
Hi, thank you for the explanation. My name is Kosuke Hatta from the Japanese daily newspaper Mainichi, and I have a question on ecocide. So Fiji is one of the countries proposed to amend the Roma Statute to add ecocide as a fifth international crime. So 2 questions on this. So how many countries support the proposal so far? And do you see ecocide could apply to fossil fuel industries? Thank you.
Hi, Sam Husseini with Flashpoints Radio. I believe that I heard, and I might have misheard, some of the speakers refer to the pact as a treaty. If you could clarify that, and I might have a follow-up depending on the response to that. Thank you.
I might just take that one quickly because it's a kind of a technical misunderstanding. With the Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty is different from the Pact of the Future, just to clarify. I see the back here.
Hi,
Yes.
my name's Tara John. I'm from CNN. I heard there was a lot of horse trading needed to get the Pact of the Future over the finish line, apparently to the detriment of international commitments to climate change. I'd really like to hear your thoughts on that.
do we have a follow-up question? And then we'll kind of answer those.
Sure. Some people have raised concerns that this pact, I took your response to mean that no one regards this as a treaty, that it still tinkers with the structure of the UN in a way that might make some organs subservient to the Secretary General. The voting on this was not along the lines of polluters and non-polluters. The countries that voted against it were those that seem to polarize most with the United States, which indicates that there's some other dynamic going on here, and there are people that are claiming that this will be used as a pretext, that in the guise of taking care of climate change, that this will actually be used as a mechanism by the United States, as it's used other instruments of international law selectively, to fulfill its own strategic objectives. Do any of you share those concerns? Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. So we've had a couple of questions around climate and security, the assistance that's flowing to Pacific Islands, questions around ecocide, and views on the Pact. Perhaps I will turn first to the issue on how much finance is flowing and the importance of local solutions. Minister Maina, would you be so kind?
No, thank you so much. I mean, in relation to finance that we are receiving to address the climate crisis, let alone the very minimal amount of money that we received, but to access finance is another issue altogether, which is make it more complicated for small island states, especially for Tuvalu. So accessing finance is difficult, and this is one of the issues that we've been raising in different platforms of the accessibility for small island countries to address the issue of climate change systematically. It's a challenge for us. In terms of security, and also to complement the work of science, and under the UNFCCC, the Local Communities and Indigenous Peoples Platform, which allows not only to complement the science, but also to address the issue of climate change from indigenous perspective. We'll fall back to our traditional wisdom, indigenous wisdom. But the tricky part is that the change of climate really changed the platform of how we observe nature through the lens of indigenous wisdom. So finance, security, and of course indigenous knowledge, it really challenged the work that we do back home. And of course the non-economic side of things.
Thank you so much, Minister. I'm sorry, Marshall Islands.
I just wanted to share the figure that I have for, it's an ODI figure for climate finance for SIDS, so not just the Pacific, but across all Small Island developing states between 2003 and 2016. And that figure is 1,085 million from dedicated climate funds, which is less than 7% of the global climate finance went to Small Island developing states in that period. And then, as the minister has rightly said, for us, it's not just the quantity of the finance, it's really the quality of the finance. So it's the access issues, but also whether that finance, and let's be very frank, the vast majority of climate finance comes as loans to developing countries, which just exacerbates debt. So that's directly relevant to the justice issue. How is it that we're paying to solve a problem that we did not create? And in doing so, we are taking away from our capacity to develop, to do things like fund our schools and pay hospital bills. So I think that issue around finance really goes back to the fact that, we have to recognize that the quantity has been completely inadequate. And, what we're talking about in terms of the needs now, it's very much recognized that it's going to take trillions to respond to the climate crisis globally. And the question is, how do we get to that trillions number? And if we were to get to it, what kind of finance would it be? Would it be more loans? Because that's not going to help us at all. Because what we need is particularly for adaptation, grant-based finance. Private sector is not going to get a return on investment from building a seawall in the Marshall Islands. So I just wanted to make those points. And coming back on one final point is, we're looking at, because we're often told that, well, there's not enough money by our partners, although we do see that there is often money found for other things. So the point then is, well, one, we need more public finance, but also there needs to be innovative sources of finance. We need to make polluters pay, I think is really the first line of attack in the financial issues, which is why the Marshalls, along with our Pacific colleagues in the International Maritime Organization, is really pushing for a levy on shipping to spur decarbonization, but also to create more finance for the most vulnerable. Thank you.
Please, Solomon Islands.
Thank you. I'll be just very quick. Just to reiterate some of the points highlighted by my colleagues from the Pacific in terms of climate finance. I don't have to make a big call here, but it is very important for finance to be made available to Pacific Islands to address climate change. And that's a big call that is being thrown around in the Pacific, in terms of, not only in terms of the quantity of finance, but the quality of finance. It seems that quite a good number of multilateral partners and development partners have been providing finance, but this seems to be tripping on each other in terms of what sort of projects are they financing. And some of the development partners are financing the same sort of projects. And in most cases, it doesn't, for Solomon Islands, it doesn't goes down to the most vulnerable communities, which is that 85% of our population in rural areas. It's almost centered around in the close proximity of a capital city. And this is a challenge that we are facing. So the most vulnerable population in the country are not really getting the finance required to address the climate change impacts. And this is an area that perhaps the development partners or the donor partners really need to look seriously into. Thank you.
Just talking about finance, I think from my own personal experience recently, Fiji being classified as a middle-income country makes it impossible for us to get 100% grants from international banks or multi-development banks. And I think our climate vulnerability index, or our place in that index, is not being recognized. And I think that goes for perhaps the countries that are represented on this panel as well. And I think that is one thing that we keep asking for, is to recognize our climate vulnerability when you classify us in terms of income or GDP.
Thank you so much, panelists. That was a very rich discussion around the means of implementation, financing that we really need. I do just want to turn quickly to the question from my colleague from the Japanese Daily around ecocide. We've just gotten some information that, of course, Vanuatu, Fiji, and Samoa were the formal proponents of the ecocide amendment. However, there are many other countries, including Belgium, France, and the EU, that have domestic legislation that recognizes the crime of ecocide and prevents it. But, you know, ecocide is just one example of Pacific leadership on the international stage. Of course, Vanuatu championed the ICJ advisory opinion resolution, Tuvalu, the COSIS advisory opinion from the International Tribunal of the Sea. Marshall Islands, as we just heard, is leading on green shipping work at the IMO. There are multiple tools which we are accessing, and I just wanted to quickly pass to Fiji to perhaps say some words on that leadership.
Who've taken it to court. We have other Pacific Island countries that are supporting, as well as around 13 other countries who have domesticated laws. But, you know, 1948 genocide became a word, you know, to protect us from the horrors of World War II. Now the horrors of climate change are very real. We have Hurricane Helene that has just formed in the south of the Gulf of Mexico. And just listening to the meteorologist today, he was talking about how quickly now the strength of a hurricane increases every year, and he's always talking, and he's mentioning climate change multiple times. So for those of us whose homes, whose traditional lands, whose fisheries, whose stories are being inundated by seawater, this is our very existence. Sorry to get so emotional, but I just don't think, have you ever been to Fiji, sir? Please come, please come. We will take you to a place called Naitonitoni, which is outside Navua, just outside of the capital of Suva. 50 years ago, they had their family graveyards. Now, the graveyards are exposed by low tide. So they walk out to see the graves of their ancestors. We have more than 100 communities that are on the list to be relocated. And being relocated for us Fijians means we're being torn away from our traditional fisheries, we're being torn away from our traditional stories, from our culture, from where our grandparents are buried. So it means existential for us. It's our life, it's our culture. And I hope that everyone here will take the opportunity to come to Fiji one day. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Honorable Speaker, for those powerful words. As I said earlier, I am a proud daughter of the Pacific. So these issues are, you know, not theoretical for us. And perhaps just to get back to some questions that were raised in the room today, which, you know, the opportunity to share their views. There were some questions around the Pact for the Future, the compromises that were made. And perhaps this might be a good time to ask the panelists for their views on how you think the idea of a fossil fuel non-proliferation treaty, how do you feel that it would reinvent the world into what we want to see? Thank you.
Well, again, let me make some very brief remarks, especially in relation to the treaty. I totally hold the strong opinion that if we don't address the fossil fuel industry, we are literally letting go of all the hopes and aspirations of our future generations, especially for Tuvalu. The difference between us and other low-lying atolls is that we don't have enough space to move around. 26 square kilometers of land, with a population of around 10,000 people. And the disappearance of the island of Te Puka-Saviliwili in Tuvalu, it's literally telling us that we are losing land and we are losing life to the sea. So it doesn't matter how we put it, whether in the Pact, whether how we want to address it. If we fail and we have that fear to speak against the world powers of today, or the superpowers, then we miss the whole point. We should not have fear to talk about the survival and the continuity of our people. And that's why it is very important that Tuvalu and other Pacific countries are leading the treaty, because it's a matter of life and death for us. The question now, how further do we have to move inland? If you look up and Google Tuvalu and you see the strip of land, and it's scary. The notion of we are fighting, we are not drowning. I kept on rephrasing that. We are literally drowning, but we continue to fight. The opinion held by the media that Tuvalu will be submerged in the next 50 years or so is a creative lie. We are disappearing already. It's just a matter of when we will completely disappear from the face of the earth. So we really need to address the issue, the root cause of climate change. Talk about just transition. For us in Tuvalu, it's just a matter of who we're trying to save. Who are we trying to save? Are we trying to save the fossil fuel industry, or are we trying to save the renewable new string of activities? It's just a matter of who we're trying to save. Or we're trying to save the people who are highly and most affected by climate change. For things, our contribution to the issue is almost next to nothing. It's 0.00001, and yet we suffer the most.
Thank you, Minister. Please, each of the panelists.
Thank you. I think it is worth reiterating the point raised by Tuvalu. Whilst Tuvalu is smaller than Solomon Island, the impacts of climate change to Solomon Island cannot be underestimated. We have seen quite a massive impact in terms of coastal erosion, and also there is also an impact on our industries, particularly fisheries and agriculture, due to the coastal erosion and also the acidification of our seas. We mostly rely on fisheries as a way of a form of survival, and with climate change, this has been affected. And also in terms of our economy, we rely on fish as one of our major export, and tuna has been moving out to higher seas, and this is affecting our economy, our GDP. And if we are not going to solve climate change quickly, this will have quite a costly bearing on our economy, not only in terms of fisheries, but other industries like agriculture and also infrastructure. So this is very important call for Solomon Island to ensure that we move away from fossil fuel to renewable energy, but at the same time, we must be very strategic in terms of where we want to invest whatever finance we get from climate finance. Thank you.
Thank you. And I, with the minister from Tuvalu, who has very eloquently, I think, described what it means to have climate be a security threat for a country like the Marshall Islands, which is also a low-lying atoll nation. And I think goes directly to the question that you had posed around climate and security and the ways in which we see today, you know, not in the future, not in 2050, not in 2100, but today, islands that are already lost, homes that are empty because families have had to leave, gardens that no longer produce because the water is coming up through the soil and the soil is too salty, wells that used to provide water for cooking that maybe now can only be used to flush a toilet because it's brackish. So we're talking about water security, food security, lives and livelihood, the challenges of trying to plan a future in a place that is under threat in the ways that, you know, the minister has described and that we see every day. And this is actually a topic at this UN, this high-level meetings on sea level rise and the existential threats of sea level rise. And I think I just want to put a marker down, though, for the Marshall Islands, and the Pacific has been very clear on this. Climate change is a security threat, but our sovereignty is not in question. Whether or not, or however we do respond, whatever that requires, there in no way will be a UN that doesn't have a Marshall Islands flag. That is our position as a region, and that is an expectation that we hold the rest of this body to recognize and to support. Because, you know, there's been a lot of talk more recently on loss and damage. One of the things that we do not agree, we do not accept, we will not accept, will be lost, is the Marshall Islands state or its sovereignty.
Thank you. Well, for Fiji, our three interconnecting pillars for our country is foreign policy, is sovereignty, security, and prosperity. And for us, small island developing states or big ocean states, security is intertwined with our climate and climate mobility. We're seeing a lot more families having to be displaced, and because of the fiscal space or the lack of fiscal space, we're having trouble catering to the exploding needs of people from rural areas, maritime areas, coming into the city. So for us, I just want to reiterate that, you know, just to remind everybody in the room that it was the Pacific Island leaders and our communities who were the first to raise the alarm about the impacts of climate change. And it is really high time, like my distinguished and learned panelists have said, that the wealthy fossil fuel producing countries that are largely responsible for the climate emergency take the lead in phasing out fossil fuels and supporting our small island developing countries to survive this ecocide. Minaka.
Thank you so much to our panelists. We will take one more question and then we do have to wrap up. The ministers are busy.
First of all, I want to thank you for helping us better understand what climate change truly means for you, beyond just finance, but the day-to-day life, the day-to-day losses. So my question for you is has to do with Baku. What would you like to see the focus there? What do you have any expectations for Baku?
That's a loaded question, I think very general. our panelists, if anyone has any strong views aside from what you've already said, please.
Oh, okay, yeah. I mean, in the new collective quantified goal, one of the major issues that we want to see not to be left out or to be dropped out of it would be the issue of loss and damage fund. And that could be something that we are very much look forward and we want to see how it's going to look like. I mean, we've been attending so many COPs and when we are repeating our hopes over and over again. So let's have Baku, the COP that we have been waiting for. We don't want to repeat the same chorus over and over again. And we don't want to take false hope back home after Baku. Thank you.
Thank you for that question. I think the Pacific Island countries need to have a strong position in terms of climate financing also. And this will be an area that we will be taking to Baku also. As I've alluded earlier, accessing climate finance is a challenge, not only for Solomon Island, but for the whole Pacific Island nations. And I think there needs to be a reform in the way climate finance or the whole financial architecture for climate financing is done. And this is an area which is very critical, and perhaps we will need to take this to Baku as a position for the Pacific Island countries to make it more accessible, but also to be more strategic in terms of the adaptation projects that will be addressing the vulnerabilities in the Pacific. Thank you.
Well, you know, for 6 years now, we've had no movement on this agenda, so we'd want an agreement on the indicators for the global goal on adaptation and a proper monitoring system. And we need proper means of implementation to support us in achieving these indicators. And we also would like an agreement on Article 6.2 on mitigation.
So we know what hasn't worked. We had a 100 billion goal. And this COP in Baku is supposed to set a new goal. So let us learn from what went wrong with the 100 billion. Let us come to an agreement on a goal that actually meets the needs. We know that the needs are in the trillions. Let's make sure that we don't just have a quantum that responds to the needs, but we address the issues on quality that we've all discussed, particularly around access for countries like the Marshall Islands and the Pacific. And if we do that, that enables us to actually implement the decisions we made in Dubai on transitioning away from fossil fuels, tripling renewables, doubling energy efficiency, giving us the means to actually deliver on the commitments that were made before. So it's not just going back and talking and more commitments, and there's actually means to do what we say we would do. And then let's hold everyone to account. And that's also your job. Thank you for being here, to shine the light and make sure that, you know, we're all doing what we said we would do.
Thank you so much. Thank you to our panelists. Thank you to everyone who's here today. We do truly appreciate your attendance. I don't think that we could make a clearer call at this point. The Pacific has been very vocal, very clear on their demands from the international community. I think we all struggle to identify how to create the world that we want to see. And maybe just to quickly sum up, there were extremely poignant points about the vulnerability, the special circumstances of SIDS that need to be addressed in this new world. And I think for us, the Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty is the pathway to the world that we want to see. I think that the question is when is everyone else going to get on board? Where the Pacific are leading as they always have, and they will continue to do so. Thank you so much, everybody. We'll end it there.